Hello, and welcome to the virtual tour of my garden. My name is Nenya, and this is where I live with my husband Richard and son Lawrence. We live in this 1960s mid-terrace, which came with a front garden and also a back garden. The front garden is about 7 meters wide and about 10 meters long. It's north facing on a gentle slope down from south to north, and part of our design was to accommodate the slope. As you know, it can rain a lot in Scotland, but you can also have long periods without any rain. So it's important to try and capture the water that comes into the garden in a useful manner. Soft terracing helps with that, and also to have somewhere for the water to collect and also be usefully directed where it's needed, so it can gradually infiltrate rather than simply run off the surface of the soil. And mulching also helps with that task. And even so, there are areas of the garden which are remarkably drier than others. For those times, water harvesting is also very important, and overflow waters places which require regular supply now and then, like this window box, a pot, and there's an overflow hose also feeding the drier areas down below, and the excesses going into the pond. The back garden is even smaller than the front. It's only about 7 by 7 meters. It's south facing, although there are some tall hedges and trees to the south which provide a bit of shade to the far side of it. The back also has a gentle slope, but that has almost been eliminated through the way we set up the growing parts of the garden. There is a drop of maybe about half a meter coming down to the back door of the house. Both front and back garden are designed as edible forest gardens, featuring trees, shrubs, edible perennials, self-sowing annuals, climbers and cane fruit, and in the case of the back garden, also a patch for growing annuals with some perennials in a mixed polyculture. The back garden is laid out as more of a forest edge garden, where taller elements are positioned around the perimeter, and the middle is left open, in this case for a social area, which in early spring, when it's still too cold to sit outside a lot, also doubles as an annual's propagation area. The middle also has this strawberry growing arrangement with tiered layers of strawberries, in theory hanging over the edge so the fruit don't get rotten, and a pond in the middle to provide a bit of temperature regulation through night and day. Some plants for ornamental attractiveness and also for edible uses. That container is sewed up with water spinach for this year. The back garden also has all of our composting operation, which is quite a large thing. The reason for this is that we compost all organic matter that comes out of the household, and that includes human manure. The back garden also has water harvesting, and overflow water goes to water the drier west-facing side of the garden, and also our window box, planter, and a propagation area set up along the south-facing wall. Later in the year, when the plants here become more robust, they're either planted out or moved to another propagation area in the front, and this becomes a tomato growing shelf. The back garden also features most of the storage, with the shed in the far corner of the garden, a custom-made storage bench with a seat that doubles as a chest, and the garden table with some shelving underneath. All lovingly made by Move On Wood Recycling. The propagation shelf also has a space underneath it for storing bulkier items. And the ladder that's stored on the wall in order to save space also doubles as an impromptu shelving unit. Providing easy access to all the different food we grow was quite an important consideration for designing the back garden. And so the middle bit is paved with granite sets that we're going spare for someone. And the spaces between them are infilled with sand and soil, and they're being colonized by edible and also a few weeds, but that's okay. The soil from the dugout middle bit went to the marginal borders to raise the level of those, and to keep it in place we used a very simple structure of scaffolding board. Those were sourced from a scaffolding company that was retiring them for about £3 a board. The perennial growing areas are mulched with wood chip and compost of the coarser nature, and the area where we grow most of our annuals is mulched with compost that's a bit finer, with fewer underdigested bits in it, so that the slugs and snails don't find it so appealing. We have that beautiful stone wall at the back of the garden, which is great for small nesting birds and bumblebees, but it's also a refuge for a large quantity of snails. There's a couple of them having a nice morning. And slugs are not far behind in numbers. This is pretty much the only garden with marked vegetation among the neighbourhood, so they all congregate here for munchies. And this is why a garden mainly focusing on growing perennials is a good idea, because they can take a few nibbles much more easily than tiny seedlings of annuals. Whereas the back garden is very much a functional space. The front is a bit bigger, it's used a bit differently, and so we can afford an element of aesthetic appeal. But with it all, the front is also a highly functional space. Even though it is north-facing, there you can see Arthur's seats through the gap in the buildings. There are no tall trees either side of the garden, so it does receive a lot of sun in the morning and in the afternoon, which allows us to grow a very wide range of edible crops here. We have several mature trees. We have this windbreak hedge, which reaches perhaps 3-4 meters in height. We have a number of fruit shrubs of various sizes, and we have some edible perennials, which also have a high ornamental value, so some people would label them edimentals. There are climbers here, mixed in with trailing and trained shrubs, some with mainly ornamental uses, like honeysuckle and clematis, and others with edible uses, at least in theory, like this Arctic kiwi, which hasn't yet fruited, but then it's still only very young. We also have cane fruit in the front, this massive raspberry trained into the cherry tree there. And whereas in the back garden the rampant propensity to crawl around of the raspberries is curtailed by using that bamboo liner, to contain its roots in one place. In the front garden, we rely on the clumping cultivars rather than roaming ones that stay in one place, simply sending out new canes every year. Like this raspberry, the variety Glencoe, and this red-stemmed cane, Japanese wineberry. Like many other things in this garden, the pond is multi-purpose. It has an edible element, some ornamental plants, and it's a good attractor for different kinds of insects and other animals to do with pest control, like frogs. We don't have fish here, but we have many edible plants. There is watercress with brownish leaves, and the pink variegated leaves belong to water celery, cultivar called flamingo. There is also the miniature cousin of the common bulrush or reed mace or cattails, call them what you like. These won't grow too big to dominate the pond completely. And we grow arrowroot, Sagittaria, or duck potato it's sometimes called. You can just about see the tubers in the water. They're gonna send out leaves soon. But it is the tubers that you want for food. They are quite rich in starch. And the roots of Typha, the bulrush relative, are also rich in starch. So in theory, you could have an entire green soup from here. Some things substituting for potatoes, some for spinach. Some plants are included here because they are just plain gorgeous to look at, like that marsh marigold, kingcup, and the little water forget-me-not in the middle. That's not in flower yet. The pond is also a haven for water-loving wildlife. This year we had frogs galore in here, and now there are little tadpoles, tiny baby tadpoles in there. There are also insects in there, some sort of water invertebrate, some crustaceans, and the birds come in to have a bath now and then. The middle bit is a bit deeper than the edges, which feature shelves for positioning these growing baskets so that your plants are rooted firmly somewhere. And that strange stone structure is a refuge for emerging little froglets, so they have somewhere to escape and not become prey to our cats. The trees in the front garden are two plums. This one is a blue tit, and this young one is called Coe's Golden Drop. They're good for cross-pollination, and they seem to enjoy the company of black currants, which are underplanted around. And these are gold currants, Rubus aureum, a North American species closely related to black currants. And also there's this ornamental white flowering currant. According to Patrick Whitefield, plums and currants, black currants in particular, make for very good companion plants. Our sole cherry is a cultivar called Summer Sun. It has rather gorgeous blossom and very tasty fruits. But we do have to rely on the pigeons' generosity in leaving us a few berries. As you can see, the tree is far too big for netting. So I'm thinking of maybe adding a bush cherry cultivar to try and get most of the fruits ourselves. Another sizable tree is this Chinese dogwood, Cornuscosa sinensis, which will soon have very beautiful flowers with bright white leaf bracts in the background of the flowers to set them off and tell the pollinators, here, here, come here. And these are the remains of last year's fruit. Don't know how they got missed because these are delicious. They're bright red and somewhere between lychee, pineapple and mango in taste. Another species of dogwood here is a dwarfing cultivar of cornelian cherry. It's all but finished flowering now. Hopefully it'll give us some interesting fruits in the autumn, which are like a small olive in size and can also be pickled like olives. Or you can wait until they're fully mature and enjoy them raw or in pies. They're somewhere between a plum and an apple in flavour. We also have a small mulberry which is yet to offer us any fruit. It leaves out quite late, as you can see. And a new arrival for this year is this pawpaw cultivar sunflower, which, unlike its wild North American relatives, shouldn't grow to about 10 meters in height, but stay at a manageable 3.5. It's not leafed out yet either. The green leaves arching into it are those of a goji berry. And goji, even if it doesn't flower and fruit for you, you can eat these fresh green shoots as a vegetable. Two other new additions to the garden this year are these two crab apples, which we've rather developed a taste for. And their job is also to help with pollinating our apple trees, which are in the back garden. And they have quite a long flowering time, and they're touted as a universal pollinator for apples, so we'll give this a go. Our windbreak hedge was added maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, so it's grown quite tall in this short span of time. And it's mainly made up of one species, a hybrid oleaster, Elaeagnus exebingi. Most of them have these simple green leaves, but there are also a couple of variegated cultivars. And they're added not just for vanity. Elaeagnus is not self-fertile, and so you need at least 2 genetically non-identical plants for cross-pollination to achieve fruit. Why is this fruit a big deal? There's not much to look at. Maybe in a month or so they'll turn orangey red though. And then they'll be quite pleasant to eat, but that's not all. The thing is that this species is touted as the next possibly good, reliable oil crop for temperate climates. But the problem is that nobody so far has managed to entice it to fruit reliably. This bigger plant here doesn't seem to want to fruit at all. It doesn't even flower. So I'm trying to see whether my observations into its flowering behavior can be added to the sum total of knowledge that we have about this plant so far. One thing we do know about it is that it is a nitrogen fixer, and this is probably what allows this rather densely planted border to flourish. Everything still seems to get enough nutrients and water. Not only that, but also the cane fruits that are tucked in amongst it seem to be growing to a magnificent size of 3+ meters in the case of this raspberry. But it's probably more than just the nutrients, because here in a situation it's a very similar companion layout. The canes are growing to much smaller size. Here it's a lot drier, so maybe moisture is also a key to the success and the size. The space underneath the hedge and under most of the trees is planted up with shrubs of various sizes. Blueberries, smaller bilberries, potentially slightly taller but still young huckleberry, white currants, red currants, black currants. Edible honeysuckle, also known as honeyberry, in flower now. It's recommended that you have at least 2 of them for cross-pollination, so there's another one. Gooseberries. Here's some fruit forming already. Mahonia, which does produce fruit that you can make into jams and pies, although we haven't so far. And the larger shrubby herbs like this rosemary here, and the remains of what used to be a magnificent sage plant, but somehow gave up last year. In the back we have 3 apple trees: Discovery, this russet whose precise name I've forgotten, and Pitmoston's pineapple, which leaves out and flowers rather later, although the 3 are supposed to be in the neighbouring flowering groups. So hence our attempt to enhance the pollination opportunities for the Pitmoston's pineapple with the help of those crab apples. We have 2 pear trees. One is a conference, which is fruiting very well, and that one was meant to be Burre Hardy, but it's something else with smaller fruit. Probably one of those fun-sized pear trees or pear fruit trees. We have a fig, which so far hasn't done a great deal, but this year there's at least a hint of a fruit there. And the shrubs in the back garden include a red currant and gooseberries, which are more tolerant of shady conditions here under the shadow of the hedge. Some of the shrubs in the back garden, like this Worcesterberry, are trained against the wall, so they are very much 2-dimensional in their growing pattern. It does mean a bit more effort in pruning and training it, but the fruit is very accessible. The east and west sides of the garden are given over to narrow strips of cane fruit, in this case autumn fruiting raspberries, which also in some cases produce a summer crop on the 2nd-year canes. And on this side we have summer fruiting raspberries, blackberries, and this rather rampant tayberry. We have some climbers here as well. That's a very edible one called chocolate vine, Akebia quinata. It is smothered in these beautiful, very fragrant blooms. There are 2 plants together, one with white flowers and one with dark red ones. And these flowers, if pollinated, become rather magnificent fruits that are reminiscent in their taste of custard apples and a bit of melon thrown in. The shoots are also edible. The tips you can cut off and use in stir fries. And its fragrance is strong enough to fill the garden. We have some other fragrant climbers, a rose and a passion fruit and a jasmine, all in that corner together. Less edible, although still useful, especially the rose petals we use for soap making and bath bombs and such like. The shoots of this clematis are purportedly edible, although a lot of things in the family Ranunculaceae contains poisonous species. So we haven't really tried this yet, but it's good to know that it's there for when we need it. There's a small climber here called Schizandra sinensis, with leaves that can be used to make tea and fruit that are very high in vitamin C and keep well. In the corners where we can't reach very easily and along the back wall, we also grow some mainly ornamental climbers like the honeysuckle and clematis. And we also have this herbaceous climber which dies back every winter and comes up every spring with these multiple fresh shoots that are good for eating. This is Caucasian spinach, Herblitzia temnoides. The shoots that you don't harvest straight away will climb up and up and up and become quite tall. But you can still harvest the leaves and eat them. A lot of forest gardening is about filling out the ground level planting, your herbaceous perennials, your roots, your trailing ground cover plants. Some of these also happen to be quite ornamental. Some look a little bit more purely functional, you could say. This is Good King Henry, a spinach substitute, which also has edible seeds. There's a forming flower head. In with it is a young sweet Sicily. You can see the white variegation on the leaves there, which helps with identification. Both can be eaten raw, although we enjoy them more cooked. We have ostrich fern, which is the only fern you can reliably consider to be edible. It's slightly past its most edible stage now. We really want the tightly furled up fiddle heads as they come up. That we're just allowing to roam free along the back of the back garden. There's some more of it there. There's a perennial kale. This one is still quite small for the size it can reach. It'll probably grow a lot taller this year, send out side shoots and eventually keel over and lie down here. So we left a bit of space for that eventuality. There's rhubarb, which is quite familiar to a lot of people. And underplanting the rhubarb, here we have ramsons. This is the peak season for them in late April, early May. And later on they'll die back, so they won't suffer when the rhubarb leaves expand to even greater widths. Daylily, in this case, it's a species that has not only edible flowers, as they all do, but also edible green shoots, eaten in China. Although we've yet to grow enough of it to make a meal's worth. Hostas are easier to grow enough of for a meal. This is the stage at which they are the most desirable. You cut off the furled up leaves. You can steam, boil, stir fry, even have them raw. This bladdercampion, which can cope with rather dry conditions, features edible shoots, good in salads, probably better stir-fried or cooked. Another thing that's better cooked is this blood-veined sorrel, but its cousin, the French sorrel, is very highly edible raw, has a very pleasant lemony taste and nice texture. We grow a few interesting alliums. This is Siberian chives. It's more upright than the common chives here, which flops about a bit. And it grows a lot taller. It's like chives on steroids. We have German garlic. A few new garlic species that are widely eaten in the Far East. We're yet to try them. There are elephant leeks, which can perennialize, and Babington's leeks, which all came from a plant established in the front garden from the bulbils of that one, and that itself came from bulbils collected in Ireland in the Burren. We have dandelions for salad purposes. This is a cultivar with particularly broad leaves. We grow a lot of pink purslane, or rather allow it to grow itself. It has nice succulent leaves, and the whole plant can be harvested and eaten. We also grow this trailing bellflower, which a lot of people have roaming in their walls. It doesn't mind shade, it doesn't mind dry conditions, and it stays green throughout the whole year. There's scorzonera for young shoots. Also you could dig up the roots and eat those. This is Anchusa azurea, a relative of comfrey and forget-me-not, which is a bit like a perennial borage. You can eat the flowers and the leaves. The flowers are not as mild as borage flowers, there's a bit more kick to them. So we do also welcome borage self-sowing here in the more shady part of the garden. We have a rather magnificent form of sweet violets with massive leaves that are nicer in flavour than the common ones. And we have this rather magnificent plant of perennial rocket. If rocket's your thing, then you'll like this. It's got a bit more of a kick, more flavoursome. Doesn't bolt. This one doesn't even flower, just keeps growing. We grow mint and lemon balm for our teas, and quite a few culinary herbs. A bay there, next to this rather beautiful mallow relative, a butylon, edible flowers. In the front garden, the perennials we grow for food are also quite good to look at. This is no exception. This is giant Solomon's seal. You will eat it at a much earlier stage, when it's just emerging out of the ground. But you can still use the whole plant for cosmetic decoctions that are supposed to help with clearing the complexion. We're not quite too late to harvest this magnificent thing, which is called Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, sometimes also known as Oriental borage. Its flowering is almost at an end, so it's a very early bee plant, and bumblebees absolutely love it. There's the remains of the former glory there. It's related to comfrey and forget-me-not. You can see some similarity in the flower arrangement there. What you'll eat are the emerging leaves, flower stalks, if you can bring yourself to it, but also just young leaves and their stalks. They're really good, and also quite reminiscent of ordinary annual borage in their taste, the leaves. There's muskmallow here, hiding among the alpine strawberries, which are just roaming freely in the garden. And you will eat the leaves, and the flowers are also quite nice raw in salads. Leaves can be cooked. They're a bit mucilaginous in texture, which is a fancy way of saying a bit slimy. And this is emerging yellow asphodel, which is grown for its roots. Another plant grown for its edible roots, although I would probably grow it anyway, is this American species, dog's-tooth violet. And it's the shape of the roots that gives it the name, because they look like massive canines. There's a clump of lemon balm, very useful for tea. There's some more daylilies, aquilegia, with flowers that are useful for salads, although other parts are poisonous. And some other primroses with flowers you can pluck for a salad as well. And cowslip flowers are also good for teas if you dry them. There's another kind of sorrel that just self-sows itself. It's called sheep sorrel, and it quite likes these acidic conditions. So it's happy with our bilberries and blueberries. Here's the fully grown Babington's leek. The dock-like leaves belong to a dock relative called Persicaria, and this is edible much more so than the ordinary dock is. And we have this magnificent cardoon with silvery leaves, which offers very artichoke-like flower heads, and also you can blanch the midribs on the leaves with cardboard or something else light excluding, and then they can be used as a vegetable. This honesty is an annual or a biennial plant, and it's self-sowed here. We don't really mind because it's fully edible, and the flowers also have a lovely scent. The silvery, slightly succulent looking leaves belong to a sedum, a stone crop, which is similar to orpine, described as edible in many sources. This one is sedum spectabile. Very edible, and also produces these beautiful flower heads of dark red colour, which persist well into the winter. The blue lungwort flowers are also edible in salads, but there's not really enough of it to go around very far. But you'll never be short of oregano, here in two distinct colour forms, with more yellowy green leaves and ordinary green. And that's a great culinary herb and also amazing for pollinators. You might ask, in conclusion, are we happy with this garden and how we designed it? The answer is reasonably so, yes. The gardens provide us with the food we want, don't take too much time out of our lives to look after them, and generally are doing a pretty good job of looking after themselves most of the time. This is not to say that they are no work. There is work. There's always something that you could be doing. Here, somebody has been digging overnight, so you could sweep that up and put that back on the bed, all that mulch that's spilled. You could add more plants. You could rethink the way that they're planted, change their places, swap them round. There will be some weeding, some pruning, some cutting back. But the nice thing about it, that if you don't do any of those things, the garden won't go to rack and ruin too quickly. It'll look after itself for a year, 2, even 3, and it will be still possible to return it to the state you want it in. How did we arrive at the design of the gardens, given what the blank canvas was like when we moved in? As you can see, there are barely no plants, just bad lawn, patio structure, some slabs for a driveway, a few measly conifers by the fence. In answer, it took us a few years and quite a few attempts to try and come to grips with the shape of them, the size of them, and just how far we could get away with cramming them full of stuff. After a year and a bit staying at this house, we started taking matters into our own hands. There's a couple of friends that helped me to start off the pond digging. And the first iterations of design for the back garden and the front garden also came about around 2010, 2011. By about 2012 it became clear what the weaknesses of the original designs were and how possibly to correct them. And it's taken a good couple of years to work out exactly what we wanted and how. We revisited the brief, we worked with transparencies to get on paper different kinds of ideas we had about how to organize the space better. And eventually we arrived at the final version, the current design, which we implemented around 2014. It had a few tweaks in the last year because we've introduced another element to the back garden, which is the humanure composting. So some things had to be added, like that path leading to composters that we added in the last year. And we had to rejig the planting along the back, where there is potentially a spray from the composters as you empty them that has the potential to contaminate your food. So we mainly grow things that we would cook at the back of the garden now. And that meant moving the salad crops further to the front. At the front, similarly, it has taken us a few attempts to understand what exactly we wanted to do with the space. We knew we wanted water there, we knew we wanted it terraced in some form or fashion. We already had some trees and shrubs growing there which we didn't want to disturb too much. And it was around 2017 that we redesigned the front garden and also implemented that design. How long did it take us to change things around here? I'd say it probably took us 2 to 3 months solid work to do everything from starting the design, remeasuring things, to putting in the plants as we have decided to in the end. Yes, that is quite a lot, but consider that there was nothing here that's currently growing here. Every last bit of these plants, even every weed, we have put in ourselves in the last 11, 12 years. 10, probably. The saving grace of this kind of gardening is that it doesn't take too long to keep it under control, as it were. This spring, for example, I have weeded it once. I have topped up the mulch on the paths and on the beds. I have leveled off some of the terraced layers with a bit more organic matter, compost, soil and mulch. Created more steps for the water to flow more gently. That all probably took up to a week, in bits here and there. So once everything is planted, it doesn't take that long to look after. But many people don't realize that even planting a single plant can take half an hour, 2 hours easily, depending on the soil conditions. So on average, I would probably allow about 5-10 days a year for essential tweaking and maintenance, and then a few hours each week for harvesting. So what do we get out of this garden? Why bother? We get salads of some kind, depending on the time of year, for maybe good 9 months out of 12. And there'll be a few leaves to eat even in winter, in the dead of winter. Unless it's covered with snow and ice, of course. We get greens for soups, for stir-frying, for curries and other dishes, easily for maybe 7 months a year. They'll not make a meal in themselves necessarily, not unless you grow enough starchy root crops and grains, and there is just not enough space here for them. But you'll get at least something to go with a meal. A salad, some herbs for flavouring, and certainly you'll get enough decoration. We'll be self-sufficient in fruit since about late June, early July. Throughout the summer and into the autumn. Apples will last us probably well after Christmas. And the pears are usually gone by the end of November. But we'll have filled our preserves cupboard and the freezer chest by then. And of course, this place is just pure joy to be in. You can observe things change on a daily basis. This year, perhaps more than any other. And even though the place is really tiny, the way it's laid out, especially the front, you can still lose yourself in a bit of mystery about what's to come round the next corner. And the work we do here doesn't really seem pointless as such. If I have to clip this hedge, the hedge trimmings will just fall down on the path and mulch it more. Most of the weeds will just be left where I've pulled them out again to become mulch. Trimmings from the windbreak hedge and from all the fruit trees go to feed our chipper, and the chipped material is used as a cover for the compost flue and assists in composting the more nitrogen-rich matter that comes out of the humanure toilet. And the more sensibly you design where each element goes, what it behaves like, what kind of jobs it creates around itself, if any, the less time you'll be spending tweaking things, changing things, servicing things, and the more time you'll be spending just enjoying them. As you can see, fruit is positioned for easy picking close to the paths, and that includes the little strawberries as well. Further away, where I don't venture very often, I can allow something to flourish purely because it's beautiful. And sometimes the beautiful and the useful can be allowed to share the same space. What would I change, if anything? Good question. Possibly the location. It's not a very floriferous neighbourhood. And now that I know how to get to grips with a small space, it would be nice to have a challenge of looking after a much bigger one. Other than that, I'm pretty happy with my lot here. And in that respect, at least, the design I think has worked pretty well.